Something extraordinary just happened in the United States, and if you blinked, you might have missed it. A Democrat has just flipped a Texas state Senate seat that Republicans considered untouchable. This wasn't a swing district. This wasn't a purple seat. This was a deep red, ruby red Republican stronghold that had been in GOP control for more than 3 decades. And now, it's blue. The race took place in Texas State Senate District 9, a district that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in 2024 by 17 points. In 2022, the Republican candidate won this same seat by 20 points. Those numbers matter because they tell us something important. This district was not supposed to be competitive, not even close. Yet in this special election, Democrat Taylor Remitt didn't just win, she overperformed by an astonishing 31 percentage points. Let that sink in. A seat Trump won by double digits flipped by double digits in the opposite direction. That kind of swing doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because of a bad candidate, and it certainly doesn't happen in isolation. This is the kind of result that sends shockwaves through the political system, the kind that forces strategists, donors, and party leaders to stop and ask a very uncomfortable question. What is going on with the Republican Party right now? What makes this result even more stunning is the money gap. Republicans dramatically outspent Democrats in this race. Historically, that kind of financial advantage almost guarantees victory, especially in a deep red district like this one. But money didn't save them here. Despite being outspent, despite running in hostile territory, despite decades of Republican dominance, the Democrats still won. That tells us something critical. This wasn't about campaign mechanics. This was about voters. Either Democratic voters are showing up in massive numbers, Republican voters are staying home, or, and this is the most dangerous possibility for the GOP, both. Now, Republicans are already trying to downplay this result. They're calling it a fluke, they're calling it a low turnout anomaly, they're calling it anything they can to avoid facing reality. But here's the problem for them. This Texas race is not an isolated incident. It's part of a growing pattern that's been playing out across the country, in special elections, statewide races, and even in districts Donald Trump won comfortably just months ago. And every new data point tells the same story. Democrats are consistently overperforming expectations. This Texas result matters not just because of where it happened, but because of what it signals. When voters in one of the most conservative states in the country start flipping seats that haven't changed hands since the early 1990s, something fundamental is shifting beneath the surface. And as we move closer to the midterm elections, that shift could have consequences far bigger than a single Texas district. This wasn't just a win. This was a warning. The historic win in Texas has sent shockwaves through the nation's political landscape. This isn't just about winning a single seat. It's a clear sign of changing voter behavior. First, it's important to understand that this district has been a Republican stronghold for decades. Since 1991, it has remained a deep red district, firmly under Republican control. Democrats never expected a win here. Yet, Taylor Remitt flipped this district blue, defying expectations. This shift isn't only about numbers or percentages. It's about the magnitude of overperformance compared to previous elections. Trump had won this seat by 17 points in 2024, and the Republican candidate by 20 points in 2022. In this special election, the Democrat won by over 14 points, signaling a historic overperformance. This isn't just a statistic, it's a political earthquake. What had been decades of consistent Republican dominance is now showing signs of change. Another key factor behind this win is the spending gap between Republicans and Democrats. Normally, the party that spends more has a higher chance of winning. In this race, Republicans outspent the Democrats significantly, yet the Democrats still won. This proves that money alone does not guarantee victory. The election also reflects voters' frustration with broken promises and government performance. People are no longer voting blindly along party lines. They are paying attention to whether promises are being kept. This race also highlights Republican voter apathy. Many supporters stayed home or were demotivated by unfulfilled promises, while Democratic voters were energized and mobilized. The Texas win cannot be seen as an isolated incident. It is part of a growing trend, evident across special elections and state-level contests nationwide. Political analysts also view this as a lesson in voter behavior. It demonstrates that even deep red districts can shift if voter turnout, enthusiasm, and party performance align in the right way. Importantly, this win is a warning for the Republican Party. Continued voter frustration and apathy could create serious challenges for them in upcoming elections. Another point is that the current political environment shows that voters are focused not only on promises but on real, tangible results. Texas's outcome makes it clear. People are no longer voting solely on claims. They want to see actual change. This event opens a new chapter in American politics, sending a strong signal for future elections. It is both a milestone for Democrats and a wake-up call for Republicans. The Texas result shows the growing power of voter engagement, enthusiasm, and accountability. As the political landscape shifts, the message is clear. Promises alone no longer win elections. Results and action do.
Now that we've covered the historic Texas win and why it matters, let's dig deeper into what made this result possible. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a fluke. This victory came down to voter behavior, enthusiasm, and a widening gap in momentum between parties. One of the most striking aspects of this race was the financial disparity. Republicans spent significantly more than Democrats, in some cases nearly double. Historically, that kind of spending advantage would almost guarantee a win, especially in a district that has been Republican for more than 3 decades. Yet, despite being outspent, the Democrats still emerged victorious. This clearly shows that money alone does not win elections. What matters more is how voters feel, how energized they are, and whether they believe in the candidate or party delivering real results. In this race, Democratic voters were motivated, and they turned out in large numbers. Conversely, Republican voters appeared less enthusiastic. This combination of high Democratic engagement and low Republican turnout created a perfect storm for the upset. But enthusiasm isn't the only factor. This election also reflects growing voter frustration with broken promises and political spin. Across the country, Americans are increasingly judging politicians on what they actually deliver, rather than slogans or party affiliation. Donald Trump, for example, ran on a platform of affordability and economic relief. He promised lower grocery prices, cheaper gas, and more accessible living costs. But in reality, prices have risen, inflation remains a concern, and many households are spending more each month than they did just a few years ago. This discrepancy between promises and reality is shaping voter attitudes, particularly in districts that once seemed untouchable for Democrats. It's also important to note the psychological impact of repeated underperformance. Republican voters in this Texas district may have felt complacent, assuming the seat was safe. Meanwhile, Democratic voters, energized by the opportunity to create a historic upset, turned out in higher numbers. That enthusiasm gap was decisive. Another key insight is that this pattern is emerging nationwide. Special elections in New Jersey, Virginia, and Georgia show similar trends. Democrats are overperforming in districts where Republicans had strong historical control. Every new upset reinforces the idea that voter sentiment, not party legacy, is the ultimate deciding factor. The lesson is clear. Campaigns cannot rely solely on historical data, spending, or perceived safe seats. Momentum, turnout, and credibility matter more than ever. Politicians who ignore voter frustration or who fail to address everyday concerns like affordability and cost of living risk being blindsided by the electorate. So the Texas upset isn't just a single seat flipping, it's a wake-up call for both parties. For Republicans, it's a signal to re-engage with voters, address their real concerns, and rebuild trust. For Democrats, it's a sign that energy and organization can overcome even the steepest odds. In short, this race is about more than a district. It's a microcosm of the shifting political landscape in America, where voter engagement, enthusiasm, and accountability are reshaping the rules of the game. The Texas upset wasn't just a one-off event. In fact, it's part of a growing national trend that is impossible to ignore. Across the United States, Democrats are consistently overperforming in special elections, statewide contests, and districts that were once considered solidly Republican. Take New Jersey and Virginia, for example. In recent statewide elections, Democrats secured double-digit victories in areas that historically leaned conservative. In Georgia, the Democrats managed to flip their first non-federal statewide offices in nearly 20 years. These victories aren't coincidences. They are data points in a pattern of Democratic momentum. Even in districts that are considered deeply red, Democrats are performing remarkably well. A prime example is Tennessee's high-profile 7th Congressional District. This is a district Donald Trump had won by 22 points. Yet in the recent special election, Democrats came within 9 points of winning, shrinking a previously massive margin by 13 points.
This swing demonstrates a clear shift in voter sentiment, even in the most conservative strongholds. CNN data confirms this trend. In every single special election for the House in 2025, Democrats overperformed expectations by double digits, every single one. In fact, 2025 alone accounts for 5 of the 15 largest Democratic overperformances since Trump first became president in 2017. That's nearly a decade of elections, and these recent results stand out as some of the most dramatic shifts in voter behavior. So why are Democrats surging, even in districts that appear unwinnable? The answer lies in voter awareness and dissatisfaction. Across the country, Americans are noticing a gap between political promises and reality. They're frustrated with rising costs, inflation, and policies that fail to address the daily challenges they face. Donald Trump's central campaign promise was affordability. He claimed that under his leadership, grocery prices, gas, and other essential costs would drop. But the reality tells a different story. Households are spending more each month than before, and prices for necessities like food and gas have continued to climb. This disconnect between promises and outcomes has created an environment where voters are willing to challenge entrenched power structures, even in traditionally Republican districts. It's also worth noting that Republican overconfidence may be contributing to these losses. Many voters assumed certain districts were safe, which led to complacency. Meanwhile, Democrats, seeing an opportunity to make history, mobilized their base with enthusiasm and focus. These patterns aren't limited to one state or one election cycle. They are emerging nationwide, signaling a broader shift in political dynamics. Democrats are proving that with strategic organization, clear messaging, and energized voters, they can overcome historical Republican advantages and secure wins in previously unwinnable districts. In short, the Texas result is part of a much larger story. It isn't a fluke. It isn't a one-time anomaly. It is a clear indicator that voter sentiment is shifting across the country, and both parties must pay attention to these changes as they prepare for upcoming midterms. The question now is, will Republicans adapt, or will these trends continue to favor Democrats nationwide? The answer may shape the outcome of the next election cycle in profound ways.
Now that we've seen the Texas upset in the context of a national trend, it's important to examine one of the key issues driving voter sentiment: affordability. Donald Trump ran on a clear and simple message: make life more affordable for Americans. He promised lower grocery prices, cheaper gas, and a general reduction in the cost of living. His campaign slogan and speeches constantly emphasized that everyday Americans would pay less for essential goods and services. But the reality tells a different story. Since Trump took office, prices for groceries, gas, and everyday essentials have continued to rise. Inflation, though officially reported as lower than its peak, remains a real concern for millions of households. According to economic data, the average American household is spending hundreds of dollars more each month compared to the pre-Trump years. That is not the affordability voters were promised. This gap between promise and reality has not gone unnoticed. Americans are paying attention, and their wallets are sending a clear message. Promises without results are no longer enough. In districts like Texas's 9th, where voters previously supported Republicans overwhelmingly, this economic frustration has contributed to Democrats' surge. It's not just the overall increase in costs, it's the personal impact on families. Households now face higher grocery bills, increased transportation costs, and rising healthcare expenses. Even as Trump repeatedly claims that prices are going down or inflation is under control, most voters see the opposite in their daily lives. Trump has also pointed to Democrats and other factors as responsible for higher costs, but the reality remains. Policies implemented under his administration, such as tariffs and certain trade restrictions, have directly contributed to increased expenses for the average American household. For example, economists estimate that tariffs alone have added over $1,000 per year to household costs, a figure expected to rise further if current trends continue. These economic pressures have had a direct effect on voter behavior. People are motivated not only by party loyalty, but by how policies impact their daily lives. When voters see a candidate or party failing to deliver on affordability, it creates both frustration and urgency, a perfect environment for political upsets. In Texas, the 31% overperformance by Democrat Taylor Remmett can be partially attributed to this economic reality. Voters were not just looking at political slogans, they were looking at their own budgets, their grocery receipts, and their gas bills, and the results were clear. The promises they had been sold didn't match their lived experience. In short, affordability is more than just a talking point. It is a measurable factor affecting voters' decisions in districts across the nation. The mismatch between what was promised and what was delivered has fueled a surge in Democratic performance, even in historically Republican strongholds. As we continue to track the national trend, it's clear that the economic reality is shaping political outcomes. Voters are more informed, more motivated, and more willing to hold politicians accountable for the costs of their policies.
Continuing from the affordability issue, let's dive deeper into what everyday Americans are actually experiencing under the current economic environment. This is critical to understanding why Democrats are gaining traction, even in historically Republican districts. Households across the country are facing rising costs for essential goods and services. Groceries, gas, healthcare, and childcare are all significantly more expensive than they were a few years ago. According to recent economic reports, the typical American household is spending around $28 more per month just to maintain the same standard of living compared to September 2024. That's money taken directly out of family budgets, money that could have gone towards savings, education, or emergencies. When we zoom out further, the numbers become even more alarming. Since the beginning of 2021, the average household is paying over $1,000 more per month than before. That is $12,000 a year, an enormous burden for working families. And while politicians promise solutions or blame their opponents, most Americans experience the reality firsthand. Costs continue to rise, wages remain stagnant for many, and daily life becomes increasingly challenging. This economic reality has a direct impact on politics. Voters are not only frustrated, they are motivated to act. In the Texas 9th District, for example, these financial pressures likely contributed to the historic 31% overperformance by Democrat Taylor Remitt. People aren't just voting based on ideology, they are voting based on how policies affect their wallets. One key factor contributing to rising costs is Trump's tariffs and trade policies. Experts estimate that tariffs alone have added $1,200 to $1,600 per household annually, depending on the year. That's money families could have used for groceries, bills, or other necessities. These policies disproportionately affect working Americans, even as the wealthiest benefit indirectly through tax and trade advantages. Beyond the numbers, there is a psychological impact. Families see politicians living in luxury, golfing at private resorts, flying on private jets, or profiting from government positions, while their own costs rise and wages stagnate. This perception intensifies voter frustration and creates a climate where historical party loyalty can be overridden by practical concerns. In short, economic stress is shaping electoral outcomes. People are watching, comparing, and responding. The Texas seat flip, along with other special elections, highlights a simple truth. Americans vote with their wallets as much as with their hearts. This trend also signals that both parties must address affordability and cost of living concerns head-on. Ignoring these issues risks further political upheaval. Democrats, on the other hand, are capitalizing on this shift, connecting with voters' real experiences and translating them into electoral gains. Ultimately, understanding the financial pressures on American households is key to understanding the broader political shifts across the nation. Rising costs are not just numbers on a report. They are driving the energy, enthusiasm, and decisions of voters everywhere. Beyond affordability and rising living costs, another factor is shaping voter sentiment: Donald Trump's personal wealth and perceived hypocrisy. This is a political and psychological element that is often overlooked, yet it has a major impact on elections. While many Americans struggle to pay higher bills, afford groceries, or cover rising healthcare and childcare costs, Trump continues to accumulate wealth and live in luxury. Reports indicate that he benefits financially from his presidency, profiting from his businesses, gold ventures, and crypto investments. Meanwhile, ordinary households are spending hundreds more per month just to cover the same basic expenses. This creates a stark contrast between Trump's lifestyle and the reality for everyday Americans. Voters see a leader who claims to fight for affordability, yet his policies and personal gains suggest the opposite. This perceived hypocrisy is amplifying dissatisfaction in districts that historically leaned Republican. People are noticing that while their own costs rise, Trump and his allies are benefiting. The impact of this perception goes beyond individual votes. It affects voter enthusiasm and turnout. Republican voters in historically safe districts may feel disillusioned, assuming their party no longer reflects their interests. Democratic voters, energized by a sense of justice and accountability, are motivated to show up at the polls. Trump's public messaging often denies these realities. He frequently claims that affordability is improving, that inflation is under control, and that grocery prices are falling. Yet most Americans experience the opposite in their daily lives. This disconnect between rhetoric and reality undermines credibility and fuels a sense of betrayal among voters. It's also important to note that this pattern is not limited to one district or state. Across multiple special elections, voter response to economic disparities and leadership credibility is shaping outcomes. The Texas 9th District is just one example where personal perception of wealth and fairness has influenced political results. Moreover, this trend highlights a critical lesson for politicians. Voters are watching more closely than ever. They are evaluating not only policy outcomes, but also personal behavior and integrity. Leaders who are perceived as self-serving or disconnected from everyday struggles risk losing even historically safe districts. In short, Trump's wealth, combined with his promises of affordability, creates a political tension that voters are increasingly unwilling to ignore. It's not just about economics, it's about trust, fairness, and accountability. As Democrats capitalize on this disconnect, it reinforces a broader national pattern. Voters are motivated by a combination of practical concerns, economic realities, and ethical perceptions. This dynamic is contributing to the surprising results we're seeing in special elections across the country. The Texas seat slip is a prime example. It reflects not just dissatisfaction with policies, but also a reaction to perceived personal gain and hypocrisy. As midterms approach, this element may continue to play a significant role in shaping outcomes across the nation. As we reach the final part of this series, it's time to look at the bigger picture. The Texas 9th District upset is not an isolated event. It is a clear signal of shifting political dynamics across the United States. Special elections, statewide contests, and historically Republican districts are showing a pattern. Democrats are overperforming, while Republicans face declining enthusiasm. From New Jersey to Virginia, Georgia to Tennessee, the trend is consistent. Even deep red districts are narrowing, and some are flipping blue entirely. This signals a national movement in voter sentiment. Several factors are contributing to this shift. Economic pressure. Rising grocery prices, gas costs, childcare, and healthcare have made affordability a major concern for voters. When campaign promises fail to match reality, voters react. Voter enthusiasm and turnout. Democratic voters have been energized, while Republican voters in some districts have shown apathy or complacency. Enthusiasm gaps can decisively swing elections, even in historically safe seats. Credibility and perception of leadership. Donald Trump's personal wealth, perceived hypocrisy, and the contrast between promises and lived reality are influencing voter behavior. Americans are paying attention not only to policy, but also to character and trustworthiness. National trends influencing local outcomes. This isn't just about Texas or one district. Voters nationwide are responding to broader economic and political realities, making each special election a data point in a larger pattern. The lesson for both parties is clear. Historical dominance and high spending alone are no longer guarantees of success. Voter engagement, credibility, and tangible results now drive outcomes. Politicians ignoring these trends risk losing even their safest districts. For Republicans, the message is a warning. Complacency, lack of enthusiasm, and policies disconnected from everyday challenges create openings for opponents. Texas shows that voters are willing to challenge the status quo, even in areas once considered untouchable. For Democrats, the trend is encouraging. With clear messaging, focus on affordability, and mobilization of their base, they can continue to perform well even in challenging districts. This demonstrates that strategy, energy, and connection with voter concerns can overcome historical disadvantages. Looking ahead to the midterms, the stakes are high. The Texas 9th District result may be a preview of broader national shifts. If trends continue, Republicans may face further challenges, and Democrats may continue to capitalize on voter dissatisfaction and economic concerns. Ultimately, these elections highlight a fundamental truth about modern American politics. Voters are more informed, more critical, and more willing to act than ever before. Party loyalty alone is insufficient. Economic realities, leadership credibility, and perceived fairness matter more than ever. The takeaway is clear. Winning elections now requires more than money or historical advantage. It requires listening to voters, addressing real issues, and building trust. Those who fail to do so risk being left behind as the political landscape continues to shift dramatically. As the nation watches and prepares for the next wave of elections, one thing is certain: Texas was just the beginning. The story of this district will resonate nationwide, shaping strategies, campaigns, and outcomes for months and perhaps years to come.